So, welcome to this conversation. So, today I am joined by, and this is long awaited by myself and I know several other people, but I'm joined today by Karim Akerma, who's
Thank
an
you for
anti.
having me.
No, thank you, Karim. Thank you for coming. Actually, I'll introduce you first and then I'm going to tell you a bit of an anecdote. So, Karim is an antinatalist philosopher from Germany. He is well known in the antinatalist community. He has written books like Antinatalismus and HANDBUCH, which that's the German name. In English, it's Antinatalism, a Handbook. He's also the author of the 1995 book, Should Mankind Exist? A Fundamental Ethical Question. And I'm super excited to have you on today. But I'm also, I'll be honest, a bit daunted, which is one of the reasons why it took me so long to reach out to you, is because um, obviously, Karim, you've done a lot of work on antinatalism. You're very knowledgeable and you've produced a lot of work, right? And so I was aware of this, and so I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to be super prepared when I get Kareem on because he's done so much and he's so knowledgeable, and so that made me put this off a bit because I was like, well, I need to get more to grips with things, and I need to be super prepared for when Kareem comes on. So that explains the delay in having you on, but I'm so glad that you're on now. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
no, so thank you for
Finally,
coming
we
on.
made it.
Yeah. So let's get straight into it. So one of the things I did when leading up to this was I listened back to your interview on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast, and I found it super interesting that you mentioned that you had I think you referred to them as a Buddhist teacher or a Buddhist sort of guide, or was it a Buddhist teacher?
It was a teacher. It was a teacher. I might have been 17 or
Mm.
18. And in fact, he was my biology teacher.
Right. So I found that super interesting because I also sometimes go to the one of the Buddhist centers here in London, and I found it really interesting to gain a bit more. I'm no expert by any means, but gain a bit more of an understanding about Buddhism and also the relationship between some Buddhist concepts and antinatalism, which I found fascinating. And I've also asked a couple of people at the Buddhist center I go to about antinatalism.
Interesting.
So I found it so interesting that you also did the same, and you talk about that in your Exploring Antinatalism interview about how you spoke to your Buddhist teacher about antinatalism. But I wanted to ask, obviously, I don't think at that point you knew the term, or maybe the term didn't even exist at that point, but you obviously had antinatalist ideas, you know, sort of in your head to be able to even talk about it with your Buddhist teacher. Where did you first come into contact with these sorts of ideas, or have they just always been something as from from a child you've thought about?
Well, that teacher, to start with, belonged to the Red Robes, which is to say not the Dalai Lama sect, if you like, the Yellow Robes, but the Red Robes. And he introduced quite a few of us to Buddhism. Many, not
Mm,
just me, but others too, got interested in Buddhism. And he took us to assemblies and to Buddhist prayers. And I had read a bit of Schopenhauer by
mm,
then. Perhaps I started to read Schopenhauer at the age of 15 or 16. Not too much, just a little bit. And well, we were told about the cycle of birth or rebirth, actually,
mm.
and how Buddhist people try to escape from the cycle of birth.
Yeah.
And at some point in time, I asked him, wouldn't it be easiest if we simply stopped procreation
Mm,
in order to achieve the actual Buddhist aim? And I thought it would be a no-brainer, but his answer was more or less as follows: no, it wouldn't be a good idea, because if all of us stopped procreation, then bad karma would remain in our world.
Mm.
And moreover, he introduced me to the Buddhist Mahayana idea that enlightened Buddhist masters have to remain in our world until every single needy being becomes almost enlightened. So I got a bit disappointed at how difficult Buddhism actually is as regards the idea of a stop of our procreation. Now, how did I get to asking him in the first place? Maybe I have to. It has a history. Everything has a history, and I think I was prone to animal suffering early on. My father is Algerian, I am German, and I remember we visited Algeria when I was perhaps 10. And once we crossed the marketplace, and then all of a sudden there was a pit, a hole dug in the ground, filled with cow heads. It was stinking. I was appalled. I wanted to get away from there. Later on, my father, who is not an expert, who is a layman, who has no knowledge on how to do it, slaughtered a sheep. And I talked to him and I told him, don't do it. You don't know how to do it. He did it nonetheless. And again, I was appalled. So this might be parts of my background as regards an open-mindedness towards suffering here, animal suffering. And I remember I also asked that Buddhist teacher, why actually do you eat sausages on your party? We assembled at your party. You invited us to a party. I wouldn't have expected you to eat sausages. And his answer was even more disturbing. He explained if an animal is slaughtered and incorporated to the benefit of human beings, the animal's karma will be uplifted.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, well, also Buddhism has its hidden problems, and also Buddhism, at least in part, is kind of after rationalization of what human beings like to do.
Yep.
Almost all religions have these problems, except for Jainism. I would have liked he had been a Jain, but he was Buddhist. Jainism is different.
So do you see Jainism as more aligned with antinatalism than Buddhism, or do you think on the question of antinatalism they're both not quite there?
I guess Buddhism as well as Jainism are not relatable to not directly relatable to antinatalism, whereas Jainism is much more open-minded when it comes to animal suffering, because as far as I know, almost all Jains are at least vegetarians, if not vegans, whereas I hardly ever met a vegetarian or vegan Buddhist. Of course, we could talk about the difference between Mahayana Buddhism and Hinayana Buddhism, with Hinayana Buddhism striving at the singular individual's entrance into nirvana, which forms a difference between the two main sects in Buddhism. But as regards antinatalism, I think Buddhism is quite far from the idea of antinatalism, as well as Jainism, because these are old religions, and the fact they still exist is proof that,
Yeah.
well, they are not teaching antinatalism.
Yeah, exactly. There's like there's a survivorship bias for pronatalist. You know, we look at the cultures who and the civilizations that have survived today and the religions, and obviously they're all very pronatalist because those are the ones that would have survived. You know, the ones that were less pronatalist or more antinatalist even would not have survived.
Exactly. Sometimes there is a difference between laymen and masters, religious masters, where religious masters don't procreate.
Mm,
But as regards Buddhism, I think the difference doesn't apply.
mm. So you've talked about how from an early age you sort of had a concern for animal suffering. So at what point did you become vegan? When did you make that transition? Was it essentially just like at a certain point you thought, well, this is something I've always believed in. So, or was there a specific event that happened that sort of ignite, sort of caused a bit of friction within you, and you thought, actually, I need to change now?
Yes, I had these horrible experiences as a child, and unfortunately, I wasn't as intelligent, ethically intelligent as many children, because as we all know, there are quite a few children who become vegetarians
Mm,
by themselves. They are not taught, they are not introduced to vegetarianism by their parents. On the contrary, there are quite a few children aged maybe 6 to 10 who all of a sudden become vegetarians and then teach their parents
yeah,
to
yeah,
also become vegetarians, rather than the parents teaching their children on how to behave ethically.
yeah,
I wasn't that intelligent ethically. I had to see a number of these documentaries on what's going on in slaughterhouses, which in the early 90s were shown in German TV, perhaps everywhere.
yeah.
But still, I didn't become a vegetarian. My last, um, my last apology was I had become a blood donor, and I thought I need a lot of iron.
Right, yeah.
And then later on, my wife and I, we moved for a couple of years to the United States, and we said to each other, now the time has come. It's such a big change, and we're going to go vegetarian. But still, I hadn't become vegan. It's
Mm,
only some 12 years ago that I went vegan,
mm,
unfortunately. So one of my worst omissions, I must say, is not to have become vegetarian much earlier and not to have become vegan much
mm,
earlier. I should have become vegan 20 years ago, at
mm.
least.
No, but look, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a lot better than what I mean. Most people go their whole lives completely ignorant of what is even happening to animals, let alone, um, you know, sort of putting any ethic into practice. So, I mean, we can beat ourselves up, but at the same time, it's like now we've made the change, and we can at least try and undo some of the harm that we caused prior to that
Yeah.
by advocating for animals now, and trying to convince other people or convince a change in the supply chain so that there's
Yes,
more.
exactly.
Yeah.
Let me perhaps also add, as it comes to my mind, Peter Singer's practical ethics, which I had
Yes.
read around the year 1994, perhaps,
Mm.
made me change my mind, and
Right.
it was quite important.
Mm.
And it shows that, at least for some people, philosophy and philosophical arguments can be helpful to change their minds. Usually we say philosophy isn't important, it doesn't make people change their
Mm.
attitudes, but with at least some people, it helps.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I know people personally who have changed to becoming vegan as a result of philosophical arguments. I will say that they are the minority. I think most people more lead with their heart than their head, but there is an audience out there that is much more open to philosophical arguments than being changed by some sort of emotional appeal or an emotional experience. So 100% I get what you're saying. Um, well, so talking about philosophy, then this actually leads me on to the thing I wanted to ask you next, which was about your postdoctoral thesis. So you have spoken about elsewhere how you had trouble getting your postdoctoral thesis. I don't know what the right term is, but accepted at your university, and it sort of stunted your aspirations for becoming a university professor. And I wanted to ask, I think it was that you submitted it or presented it to a board, so there were or a panel, so there were multiple people on it, and you said there was a split in people that sort of gave it a pass and people who sort of rejected it. I wanted to ask if you can give a bit of detail about that series of events, but also did you ever get to um, did you ever get a reply from the people that rejected your postdoctoral thesis where they actually explained their reasonings and their specific concerns as to why they rejected it, or did you just get nothing?
Well, I submitted my postdoctoral thesis in 97. The German university works like this. You get your PhD. If you want to become a university teacher, you have to write another paper called habilitation in Germany, which is a kind of habilitation in order to give lectures,
Mm,
and you are tenure tracked then, as the Americans would say. So
yes.
I submitted 5 copies, and I was rejected by a narrow margin of 5 to 4 people, and it leaked out that that, for example, one philosophy professor didn't accept the fact that no other than Immanuel Kant
Mm,
had asked in his critique of judgment, why actually should mankind exist?
mm,
And he said, it's no Kantian question, and we cannot pose this question. And the philosophy professor who took care of me, he butted in. But Karim Akerma, he is quoting Immanuel Kant. It's a quote from his critique of judgment, but he still didn't accept it. One professor was against my postdoc thesis because she thought, and others too may have thought, they had doubts as regards my humanistic stance, my humanistic position. They thought I'm anti-humanistic.
mm,
So their equation was, he is against humankind or against humankind's further existence on Earth, so he must be anti-humanistic. He is a kind of criminal of the spirit. And even later on, I learned that I had the right to ask back for my 5 copies,
mm,
which I did. And as I leafed through the copies, I discovered, to my dismay, a number of disrespectful annotations
mm,
on those pages. Not by any of those 9 professors, but some who turned out to be my personal enemies in philosophy.
yeah.
They made disrespectful annotations. They wrote, for example, it's ridiculous and indeed no argumentation, just disrespectful annotations. That was back in '97. Today, of course, the scenery, the philosophical scenery has changed completely.
Yeah.
And I can only encourage people to write papers on antinatalism because, well, nobody is liable to get similar disrespectful annotations today.
Yeah, but I mean, even if they do get those sort of disrespectful annotations, there are so many people now. Not enough, but there are so many people now who do write about antinatalism that that person would be on no grounds to reject a postdoctoral thesis simply for broaching this topic. It seems bizarre to me that that would happen now. It may be that they personally don't like it and they may, in an immature way, leave disrespectful comments. But, the fact that they don't like something doesn't seem, back then, maybe it's not understandable, but you can see why it happens because it it was not as widely spoken about. It didn't have this term attached to it that was, now is, not insanely well known, but at least in philosophical circles, the word antinatalism is, decently known about. People at least know the term, at least in my experience anyway. But maybe I have a biased sample. So yeah, I would hope that nowadays that wouldn't happen. So sorry, go on. Were you gonna?
Yeah, so I found those disrespectful annotations, and theoretically, I would have had the chance to ask for a new committee to perhaps overrule the judgment against me of 5-4. And I asked university professors from other cities than Hamburg, and they turned out to be in favor of my work. But then,
Nice.
as things are, it turned out to be impossible to realize that idea. Maybe I should also mention it's very rare that a postdoc thesis is rejected completely. Once you've gotten that far, you won't be rejected. Actually, it's very rare. It's a kind of scandal, actually.
Yeah. Do you obviously this question is maybe impossible to answer, but I just want to get your feel for it. But do you feel that in the long run, like how much of a sort of handicap do you think that was in the long run to you being able to discuss antinatalism and get your work out there? Do you think that if you'd been able to have that opportunity, it would mean that you would have been able to put a lot more time and energy into antinatalism? Or do you think that actually looking back on it outside of that environment, you're much freer to discuss what you want in the form that you would like and that sort of stuff? So how do you view that looking back on it now?
That's a good question. If I had become a university professor, I think it would have opened up even more possibilities to discuss the topic of antinatalism, to present the topic of antinatalism. So in hindsight, it's a pity I didn't make it. And as we all know, once you're kicked out of university, you have to look for other jobs, which sometimes are very time consuming. And by and large, I was lucky though, as I still could dedicate quite a bit of time to my research into antinatalism. But had I become a university professor, or at least a chance to work at a university, I would certainly have been able to dedicate more time into it.
So let's talk about your research and the sort of work you've been able to do then. So as I said at the very beginning, you in 1995 released a book called, this is the English name anyway, is Should Mankind Exist? A Fundamental Ethical Question. And in that, you sort of entertain arguments in favor of procreation and essentially conclude that you find them unconvincing. And I wanted to ask you, in the in considering all of those arguments, but also since then, all the way up until now, all the different arguments you've heard for procreation, what would you say is the best argument in favor of procreation that you've come across?
Good question. Good question again. Well, I indeed tried to present as good arguments against mankind's ebbing away, as I called it before I was familiar with the term antinatalism, as good arguments as I could find. A rather good argument is we perhaps still don't know everything about humankind. And I broached the subject of paranormal actions, paranormal contexts. It might be that humankind is embedded in something larger, something encompassing, as we might say. For example, there are people who are convinced there is an afterlife. And some people, even scientists, claim they have recorded voices from the afterlife. It's quite interesting. At some point in time, I was about to visit one of those researchers to convince myself there are these voices, these alleged voices. There are institutes who do research on paranormal occurrences. But even if voices from the afterlife do exist, the question remains, how important is it? And is it really a caveat against humankind's disappearance by abstention from procreation? And as far as I'm concerned, I had the opportunity to visit one of India's palm libraries. Allegedly, in those libraries, there is you will find your biography written on a palm leaf. The astrologist couldn't find my palm leaf, which was, I didn't expect him to be able to find it from the outset. I had read about it as at the age of 13 or 14, and before I went to India for a visit, it occurred to me there were these palm leaves. I have to visit one of these palm leaves. So all his efforts to find my leaf were in vain. But then all of a sudden he told me, "You are born on a 7th, and you're born on a Wednesday." I know I'm born on a 7th, and later on I checked, and he was right. It was a Wednesday. I had never seen this man before, and there was absolutely no possibility for him to get hold of my data. But still, what does it mean? Supernatural, even if supernatural knowledge exists, I think it doesn't prove, it doesn't give hints that we should exist. So I think paranormal occurrences do not require our continued existence, and I see no way to derive our continued existence from paranormal occurrences.
Yeah, I find that a really interesting one because I had a conversation with a guy. I was actually having a conversation with him because he's a libertarian, and it's up on my channel. But in the conversation, we started to talk about psychedelic drugs, and he was saying that he he was very atheistic, very materialistic, but he had an experience on psychedelic drugs which suggested to him that we may exist before we exist in our our current physical sort of human form. And I had a back and forth with him about this, but I've also since spoken to a range of other people, and some of them have also cited psychedelic experiences, but other of them more just religious views. And it has made me think whenever, at least when I argue for antinatalism, and I think this goes for a lot of antinatalists, when we argue for antinatalism, we do often make this fundamental assumption that we don't exist before birth, or when sentience arises in the womb. And the way I see it, I don't see any good reason to believe that we do exist in any sort of tangible way before that point, that would in any way imply that we should be bringing individuals into existence. But it did make me more aware of the assumption that I'm making, and that personally, I feel like, it's an unanswered question, but I think if they are going to assert that there is some sort of existence before our current existence, the burden is on them to prove that. But I don't have a knockdown. It's like when someone says God exists, it's like, well, I can't prove God doesn't exist. I just take the sort of position of, well, I don't know. So, I don't believe, or, I don't believe there is a God, but I also don't believe there is not a God. I just sort of withhold judgment on that question. And it's interesting that you brought up that, because I've also found that sort of topic does get at an assumption that a lot of antinatalists make.
It's a very interesting topic, and I think it's one of our time's biggest popular myth, namely that each of us actually never was completely non-existent before we began to exist. You find it throughout poetry. If you ask the man and the woman on the street, many would say before we came into existence, there was a sublime existence. And out of this sublime existence, we became ever more existent until we were born. But many people have difficulty in accepting that at some point in time we didn't exist at all. It's a challenge to our minds to abstract from our existence, to envisage a world in which we didn't exist at all, not even subliminal.
No, 100%. And I guess it's because by definition, all we've known is existence. And so it's hard to think of a universe where we don't exist. Even when we think about death, often people will imagine death as if we're sort of looking down on Earth, watching everyone continue partying after we've died. But actually, it's just, well, as far as we know, all it is, and the lights go out.
Yes,
and
yes, definitely. Yeah. People have difficulty in accepting that they are not important, as important as they assume. There were times, not even times, but eons when they didn't exist, and there'll be times, and not only times, but eons when they won't exist. So people try to anchor themselves in the encompassing universe by saying, I did exist, at least in a subliminal form, and I will continue to exist as a minimal consciousness, perhaps.
Yeah. No, 100%. So I wanted to ask you now about something more if that wasn't philosophical, something more philosophical. So in a short essay you wrote called Historically Informed Antinatalism, and also what I'm about to say, if I get any of this wrong, just correct me.
Okay.
But so when I read that essay, I understood from that essay that your your antinatalism sort of stems from the fact that benefits that are experienced by some don't compensate the harms that are experienced by others. And it may also be the case that the benefits that we experience by being created aren't, they don't compensate the harms that we experience from being created. And I wanted to, I thought this was interesting because I wanted to ask you if this then means and correct me if that, if I've misunderstood where your antinatalism comes from or your views have changed since you wrote that essay. But I thought it was interesting that David Benatar in his book, actually, I'm not sure if he mentions it in Better Never to Have Been, but he's mentioned it in interviews in that, people ask him the question, well, what if we lived in a universe where it was perfect? There was no pain, everyone just experienced pleasure. And he takes a position of indifference there. And I thought it'd be interesting to ask you, would you take the same position of indifference? Or would you think that there maybe would be a reason to bring people into existence in such a universe because there wouldn't be any harms that would be needed to be compensated? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's one of the great questions we have to take care of. There is a philosopher. Her name is Christine Overall, and I think her title is "Why Have Children?" And she has difficulty in understanding why should we refrain from bringing beings into the world if these beings will experience only bliss, only pleasure. And my view is, I think, as regards this question, the same view as David Benatar's view. I think that there is no obligation to bring into being beings, human beings or animals, who will experience only bliss. I think, but I have difficulty in understanding and in agreeing with Benatar at when it comes to his table. Let me try if I can describe his table, table of asymmetry here. There are two scenarios in this table. In scenario A, a person X exists. Now, he says the presence of pleasure is good and the presence of pain is bad. Now he switches to a scenario where the person in question never exists. X never exists. Now he says the absence of pleasure is not bad, but the absence of pain is good. And I would say, and I would have expected him to say, that the absence of pain is neutral. Neutral in as much as it is neutral not to create beings whose existence would be filled with joy only. And I think it becomes easier to answer these questions if we talk about obligations. There was a man named Hermann Vetter. His German pronunciation would be Hermann. In English, we would say Hermann Vetter, and he presented a similar table, a table of asymmetries as regards procreation and non-procreation, and he came to this conclusion: we never ever have the obligation to create new beings, not even if we knew from the outset and their lives would be filled with positive experiences only. But I think if our value base is pleasure and pain, then Benatar and I do agree and Christine overall is of a different opinion. And what is interesting here is I'm not sure if we can bring it home to people that our point of view is right. I'm not sure if we can bring it home to people by rational argumentation that our position is right. There could be something psychological that makes it impossible for people to accept our reasoning. And perhaps our reasoning is not as convincing as it might appear to us.
Right. So you mean that it's not as though someone could take another line of reasoning which is equally valid. It's just that this line of reasoning, whilst it may be, as we see it, the only sort of legitimate line of reasoning on this question of the ethics of procreation, it's just that it's not psychologically convincing to people.
I wanted to express the psyche of some people might be made up in such a way that they have difficulty in understanding,
Right.
or even
Yeah.
understanding our argumentation. Because for them, for one reason or another, it's a must to create as much positive experiences as possible, especially when the beings in question are not able to experience negativity. I cannot follow this path of reasoning.
And obviously, in Benatar's book, Better Never to Have Been, he talks about how he believes there are sort of four other asymmetries that his sort of fundamental axiological asymmetry explain. Do you think that, and you were saying that you think maybe a sort of more reasonable table would be to take the absence of pain when X never exists to be neutral. Do you think that that version of the table would could also explain those asymmetries, or do you believe that those asymmetries aren't in fact explained by Benatar's axiological asymmetry that he puts forward? If that makes sense, did my question make sense?
Yes, I guess so. I'm not convinced that the asymmetries are helpful for people to understand the gist of antinatalism. Or put in other words, I'm not convinced that if we present asymmetries, Jan Narvson's asymmetry, Fatter's asymmetry, Benatar's asymmetry, or other people's asymmetries to people, I don't think we can convince non-antinatalists or even contribute to making antinatalists out of non-antinatalists by presenting asymmetry tables to them.
I get what you mean, but if we put aside the question of whether something is convincing to people's psychology, do you think that Benatar's claim that his axiological asymmetry explains those other four asymmetries, do you think that his claim is correct there, or would you question that?
I must admit, I don't have in front of me
The other
four
yeah.
other asymmetries, and I would have to have them in front of me right now.
No, that's fine. We can leave that line. So I wanted to ask you about another thing, actually. So you, I think fairly recently did an interview with a Polish journal whose name I'm not going to attempt to say. Do you know how to say the journal's name?
I don't have the faintest. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, if there's any Polish speakers watching now, I apologize that we cannot say the name. So you did an interview with a Polish journal that was asking you about antinatalism, and in it you explained that antinatalism and capitalism sort of pull in different directions, in that capitalism is sort of growth dependent. It sort of pursues growth, and antinatalism um, is almost like an anti-growth philosophy, right? And sort of, at least historically, capitalism seems to be, or at least the health of a capitalist society and economy seems to be very much associated with an increase in population growth. I wanted to ask you if you have any thoughts on how economics may need to change in a world with declining birth rates that we're already seeing, across the world. In many instances, there are many economically developed countries that have birth rates below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. But also in this sort of hypothetical world where Homo sapiens trend toward a final generation that antinatalists advocate, how do you what are your thoughts on how antinatalism and economics sort of interact with each other in circumstances like that?
Mhm. Yes, as you said, at first glance, capitalism appears to be maximalist, whereas antinatalism appears to be and is minimalist. Now, capitalism is quite a treacherous or elusive, not only concept, but reality.
Mm,
On the one hand, it's maximalist as it tends to produce ever more commodities, and it encompasses ever more countries, and it tries to extend itself, and it needs people, it needs buyers,
mm,
it needs a working force, it needs other countries with people who buy commodities. But there is a problem inside capitalism, which I think is called the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, which is dangerous for capitalism, because the core of capitalism is at stake. If it were the case that the rate of profit had a tendency to fall. Now, as you said, as ever more countries become richer and wealthier, there is a decline in population.
mm,
Some decades ago, it seemed impossible for us that such countries as India or China at some point in time might have shrinking populations. But China already has a shrinking population, and at some point in time, even India, which now is the most populous nation, will also have a shrinking
yeah.
population. Um, in my book, Ebbing Away of Mankind, which is tantamount to my postdoc thesis, and which
Mm,
appeared in the year 2000, I quote statistics which say that if every country had a birth rate such as Germany, the country's population would die out by the year 2400, more or less.
mm,
So if Germany had no immigration, Germany would be empty at some point in time. The same goes for Japan, for Italy, and many other countries. Now, decreasing populations are dangerous for capitalism because there are no taxpayers, there is underconsumption,
mm,
and that is boding collapse for capitalism. And a collapsing capitalist society is dangerous because as it collapses, or before it collapses, people tend to vote extremist right-wing parties. Now, how is this related to antinatalism? We as antinatalists have to think about well in advance how to substitute the capitalist mode of production by some other mode of production. We need a post-capitalist mode of production. And what could it be look like? I guess it would be some kind of low equilibrium state, which is to say it would be degrowth. Life would be much easier. First, the whole thing would be overarched by a still existing state, but later on, with ever decreasing populations, there would probably exist autonomous groups. And these groups would need some kind of municipal code. And the codes might be very different. They might differ from each other. They would be loosely associated. People would have more time, and with ever decreasing people, we would probably stop to produce commodities, and we would switch to producing goods. So at some point in time, money would disappear, and we wouldn't produce for money, but we would produce for the sake of other people. Which now it becomes very interesting, because if the society changed in such a way, life would become much better.
So, do you think that we would go back to some sort of bartering system, or how do you think? Because obviously, well, my understanding is that way back in time, humans used to barter, so trade goods for goods. But then the economies got too complex for bartering to be practical, and so they had to have some sort of medium of exchange, which started out as things like salt or barley, but then obviously it turned into a currency like money, or coinage. Do you think that as a result of our population shrinking and therefore the interactions between different people presumably becoming less complex, we would go back into bartering? Or do you think we would go back into some other system that involves the exchange of goods rather than the exchange of money?
If we consider a shrinking population or shrinking populations, that where the process of shrinking is overarched by the idea of antinatalism, then of course people are well aware of the fact they must see to it to find a mode of production which is to the best of every single person, so that people will still use advanced technology. But let me go off on a tangent, perhaps. I stopped my before you said your sentences. I was about to say life would become better as it is now than it is now. So some people might put in now life is much better and we have more time for each other. Why shouldn't we continue going on as it is now? Now, if a society which is overarched by the idea of antinatalism is about to disappear, they of course would have to be aware of the fact that later on the ideal of antinatalism might evaporate at some point in time. So if there is a possibility to decrease the population down to zero, it's a once in a lifetime, once in a generation chance, and people should grasp it rather than continue to exist. And I think people wouldn't go back to bartering, but people would be aware of their mutual needs, and they would right away produce for each other rather than exchange, because there would be a high standard of awareness of the mutual awarenesses, and we would have to do with smaller communities which are only loosely associated. There might, of course, be some bartering between the communities.
Mm. And when you were saying that this sort of downward trend of birth rates, will um, could sort of produce ever smaller communities, maybe more sort of atomized, well, not atomized, but sort of self-sustaining communities, um, and that may present an opportunity to finally get to a position where we can sort of realize human extinction. What form do you think that could take? Because presumably, if communities, even though they're smaller and they are more self-sustaining, you would then be in a situation where you would have many independent, almost settlements, or I don't know if civilizations is too big a word, that pretty much act independently. Would it not be very difficult to realize an opportunity like that? Because I know, obviously, Lenny, and there's Carlos, who run a Voidcast, Antinatalist podcast together, and they did an episode on Emil Torres's recent book on human extinction, and in that book, Emil talks about how, for a long period of human history, extinction wasn't even a coherent concept, because there was nothing that humans were so spread across the globe that there was nothing that could ever happen and we didn't communicate enough for an extinction to be realized, whether that be through a natural disaster or us all collectively to decide not to procreate and to fade into extinction because we didn't communicate. Do you not think that we would ultimately go back to that scenario if we end up in more sort of in it sort of self-contained and separated communities, that human extinction would become actually maybe less of a potential outcome?
Well, I guess even if those communities were only loosely associated, we or future humanity would still maintain modern means of communication.
Mm,
So, should there be a lack of certain goods, such as water or sand or what have you,
mm,
they could communicate to each other. We are in need of that, and in return, we could give you wheat, for example.
mm, mm,
Of course, it's very speculative, and our mindset would have to change considerably.
mm.
And maybe within a post-capitalist surrounding, our minds would change in such a way that enables us to produce for each other rather than against each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, it's sort of speculative, and it's interesting to see now, obviously, with the current situation we're in, where there are a lot of countries with declining birth rates, the government reactions to that, and many governments have reacted with pronatalist policies, trying to encourage people to have more children, which seems to suggest this attempt to cling on to the current economic model by artificially inflating birth rates rather than trying to adapt the economic model to the fact that birth rates are declining. And in the future, there will probably be a mixture of both. There will probably be an attempt to artificially inflate birth rates, but also at the same time adapt our economic model so that it can survive under lower birth rates. And I guess it's really, especially with the emergence of artificial intelligence in the form that it's taking now, and we don't know what form it'll take in the future. It's really uncertain how our future economic models will look like. Maybe we will continue to have lower and lower birth rates, so there'll be a smaller and smaller population, but perhaps we will be able to maintain the current economic models because artificial intelligence will just be a complete game changer. um, it's really, yeah, I guess it's really uncertain, but it's really interesting to see how um, the economy will change, especially on a global level, as smaller and smaller birth rates continue.
Yes, indeed. And perhaps we should direct our eyes especially to Japan, which already now is suffering from dramatically declining birth rates.
Yeah. There is actually I'm just trying to find it now. There is actually a book about which I found recently about economics with a declining population. So I've just found it now. It's called Decline and Prosper: Changing Global Birth Rates and the Advantages of Fewer Children. And it talks about the interaction between reducing birth rates and economics. And I haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but it's exactly on the topic we're talking about now, and it seems like it would be really interesting. So I'll send the link over to you just in case it's something
sounds
that
extremely interesting. Indeed.
Yeah, just in case it's something that you'd be interested in. I'll leave
definitely.
a link for people.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the front cover, it looks much more like it's not an academic book. It doesn't look like it. I mean, it might be, but it looks like it's more targeted at sort of like the layperson. But anyway, I'm sure it's an interesting book nonetheless. Anyway, so I wanted to come back to your interview with the Polish journal that I am, still not going to attempt to say their name. And in that interview you touched upon the inclusion of animals, non-human animals, in antinatalism. And I wanted to discuss that a bit with you because I thought it was interesting, because I agree with the idea that antinatalism compels us to be vegan as part of our sort of negative duty of not creating other sentient beings. I see veganism as just part of our duty to not create other sentient beings,
right.
like how antinatalism informs us or sort of compels us not to create a human offspring. I don't really see any difference between our decision to create a human and create, say, a pig or a cow. Obviously it's by different means. One is by procreation, the other is by artificial insemination, and we're paying for that to happen. But ultimately, a sentient being results as the action we're taking. So I'm in full support of that side of it. But I struggle to support the idea that antinatalism carries a sort of positive duty to intervene and prevent wild animals from bringing each other into existence. And to be fully transparent, I do think that we should, in a considered way, intervene in the lives of wild animals, because I think we should help them as as humans. I think we should do that, and I think as part of that, it is preventing wild animal births. I just think that's separate from antinatalism rather than being part of antinatalism. And I wanted to understand why you think that intervention in nature is part of antinatalism rather than more sort of a separate but aligned sort of position.
Okay, let me try to explain. Usually in ethics, we mostly talk about actions. We talk about good actions and bad actions. But I think we should also talk about omissions. And to my understanding, we have mostly, for most of the time, and most of us underestimate the importance of omissions.
Right.
I mentioned Peter Singer. There is Peter Unger, an American philosopher, less famous but as interesting perhaps as Peter Singer, who wrote a book in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, which is called Living High and Letting Die. And there he talks about omissions, namely most of us could do more to help starving or impoverished people, but we don't. And he explains it in a way that according to which we are guilty. Let me try to find an example which is more aligned with our actual topic. There is that famous pond. A child has fallen into a pond, and now it's up to us to pass by and have it drown or not. If we think about a cat which has fallen into a pool filled with water, I guess we are obliged to help that cat.
Mm.
Another example. There is a wooden house. It's night, and people are asleep inside the house. We discover a burning fuse, which is connected to the house.
Mm.
Everybody, I guess, most people would agree it's our duty to interrupt the fuse in order to rescue the people inside.
Mm.
Now, I guess we can see animals or regard animals as burning fuses. If we don't interrupt the fuse, reproductive animals will produce offspring which inevitably will suffer.
Mm.
So again, there is the question not so much of an action, but of omissions. If we don't act, we become guilty because it would have been easy for us to interrupt the fuse, which I see in all reproductive animals. And there's also a link to Buddhism. Buddhism talks about the interruption of ever new cycles of rebirth. And I would like to talk about our ability to break chains of procreation. Nature is a network which consists of chains of procreation, and we have countless opportunities to close our eyes in front of countless chains of reproduction, even though it would be very easy for us on many occasions to interrupt those chains, not to speak of fuses, burning fuses. So animals, if you like, are burning fuses, and I think if we agree that omissions are perhaps not as important as actions, but are very important, ethically speaking, then we should interrupt those fuses.
So I actually sort of I agree with everything you've just said. For me, it's a case of I believe what you to be what for what, you wouldn't think I'm a native English speaker. So I understand what you've just said to be true. Like I believe that as well. The sticking point I get to is whether that question should be included as part of antinatalism. So when someone says they're an antinatalist, we understand them to be making not just a negative evaluation of coming into existence and a judgment of those who choose to create others as committing an immoral act, but additionally, that they believe that we should go out of our way, or not even go out of our way, but just take some action that may be trivial to us to prevent other beings from being brought into existence. And to be honest, I don't know if there is a smackdown way of saying that is or isn't included in antinatalism. It's maybe more a case of identifying how the term has been used historically and how it's used in the literature, and then also just clarifying in conversations that I had about antinatalism what that specific person means by that. Because in my mind, I make a distinction between antinatalism and the negative duty that I believe it entails as to not be the cause of other beings to come into existence. But I don't encompass, or include that omission that you were talking about. Even though I do think that that omission is an ethically relevant and important thing that we should be considering, and we should not omit those things from our ethical consideration. But I just don't know whether it falls specifically into antinatalism. So I would personally say I'm an antinatalist, and I'm also a wildlife interventionist, or however you want to put it. So I don't think for us, to be honest, I don't know how. I'm sure some people will believe that it is a very important thing to sort of figure out, and I guess to an extent it is. But I think the important thing is finding out where not we agree with someone. And I think we're both in agreement in terms of the actual ethical issues. The disagreement or the misalignment is simply on what box to put those ethical agreements into. And to me, that doesn't seem like a super important question. I'm sure I say that having done a video all about, antinatalism and animals, and also I hosted a sort of like a panel on what antinatalism is. So I guess I also do think it's important, but it seems to me that the more important thing is figuring out the actual issues themselves. So yeah, I think. Do you have anything else to say on that, or did you want to move on?
Yes.
Okay, you go.
Yes.
Go.
Yes. Now I understand much better where you're coming from. So thank you for elaborating on it.
No worries.
On the one hand, I think we may achieve to transform omissions into actions, depending on our vantage point. For example, if I decide not to help that drowning cat, it could be considered as an action because it requires a decision. I decided not to help it, which is kind of action.
Yeah.
I decided to invest my energies differently. But
yeah.
If we put that aside, I agree. I agree. When it comes to defining who is an antinatalist and who is not, I would always agree there is a core of that definition, and intervening into wildlife, to my mind, doesn't belong to that core. We can, a person can very well consider herself as an antinatalist without being in favor of wildlife interventions. I do totally agree.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one when you talk about the emissions, because I also agree. If you're walking along and you see a cat, drowning in a pond or a lake, you can't help the fact but that you're in that situation, right? You are in that situation now, and you're presented with essentially two choices: help that cat or don't help that cat, and you've got to make a decision either way. And so I'm sympathetic to what you're saying about how the omission becomes an action because you're in the situation whether you like it or not, and you've essentially got to make a decision. I guess the important conversation there is to what degree do we hold people morally accountable in those circumstances? And also it gets even more complicated when you talk about legal questions, because obviously I believe in some countries, if it's seen that you could have reasonably, with little risk to yourself, have stopped a crime or some sort of harm being done, you can be prosecuted for that. But in other countries, they don't prosecute people for that. And that's an interesting one, because it's to what degree do we hold people morally accountable for that? Because I would say that if someone is walking past a pond and could help a drowning cat and they choose not to, I would morally judge them for that. I would hold them morally accountable for that. But equally, there are cats all over the world in that situation, if you get what I mean. And there are charities that could help those cats. And we're making the decision as to whether to donate to those charities or not. And it's an interesting question as to, is the moral accountability or the moral judgment we make in that first situation, does it carry over to the second situation? And if it doesn't, for what reason? And I guess this is, I mean, this is the whole question that Peter Singer was asking, right, in his thought experiment that he first put forward in. Originally, it was Famine, Affluence, and Morality, right? And then he wrote the book, The Life You Can Save. And yeah, I don't know to what degree, what sort of obligations do you think that, and do you think antinatalism gives us? So I think it's a given that you probably think that antinatalism obliges us not to procreate and to be vegan. Do you think there are further obligations? Do you think that it sort of brings upon us?
Yes, I think that according to antinatalism's core idea, we should intervene into wildlife. Even though, as I said, I don't think any antinatalist would have to agree. He or she could still be call herself an antinatalist. But I think, and that is aligned with what people such as Peter Singer try to teach us. He tried to make us rid of the idea that ethics is only concerned with our near and dear ones.
Mm.
In the next step, he says ethics is not concerned with our own country. It's as much concerned with remote areas. But of course, as many people have observed, very soon or at some point in time, our ethical engagement becomes overstressed. And at some point, it's so overstressed, we see no way to become active. So in the real life, we have to find a medium way. So such that perhaps it depends, ethics to a certain degree depends on our vicinities, on our being confronted with poor animals. We simply cannot help any suffering animal or person on the globe. And the badness of an omission, of course, becomes higher if we are directly confronted, as you said, the cat, or the starving neighbor, or the burning house in our neighborhood, or a fuse directed, fixed at a burning house.
So I realize we're coming up to about an hour and a half. So I'm going to maybe cover one final topic with you, which you sort of brought up in our email exchange, which is antinatalism as it relates to the question of intelligent extraterrestrials. And I wanted to ask, like, how do you think antinatalists should generally think about this topic about antinatalism and extraterrestrials?
I think it's a very, very important topic. Before you asked, could I imagine any arguments in favor of humankind's further existence? And here we have reached a point in our discussion where extraterrestrials offer a valid argument. Most people, or many people here on Earth, would rejoice at the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence, or rejoice at receiving signals from technologically advanced intelligences. If we mirror this scenario into space, we can expect intelligences who may be observing us and who would be disappointed if they knew we have vanished from our planet by means of abstention from procreation. So that is a weak, but at least it's a non-metaphysical, non-parapsychological argument, which could be mentioned in favor of mankind's continued existence. Now, extraterrestrial intelligence. I myself, I'm fascinated by the thought of beings similar to us or very different from us. I'm very curious about how they might look like, about their mode of thinking, their economy, and I would like to receive a signal. I would even rejoice, but no sooner have I said so, ethical reasoning calls me back, saying, Karim, you're absolutely wrong. Did you forget? Most probably, extraterrestrial beings will have behind them a long biological history of suffering, of predators and prey, because apparently intelligence develops in the interplay of predators and prey. They come up with ever more sophisticated ways to find their prey, to overwhelm their prey, or to escape. And now people say you are too negative when it comes to extraterrestrials. They can be very different. But if we look around us on Earth, there are such weird beings as octopuses. They are really weird, but they too are sentient beings which are prone to feel pain. So after all, it's extremely difficult to even think of an intelligence that wouldn't be a sentient being without suffering, except for the case where people talk about post-biotic intelligences. Then, of course, we're not talking about sentience anymore, and it would be non-biological intelligence. So there is this bifurcation, a double feeling of being attracted by the thought, the temptation to rejoice at the discovery, and at the same time, the knowledge, the almost certainty they would be similar to us when it comes to suffering. So the gist of my answer would be, we should hope for there is no second Earth in the universe. Hopefully, it's only our planet who developed sentient beings and intelligent human beings.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I was thinking there's sort of two considerations that come into my mind. The first is, and this I honestly have no, this is more a technical question because I have no idea. Given the vastness of space, even if there were other civilizations, would we be able to reach them physically, or would it only be other forms of communication that we could transmit to them? But even then, my understanding is that information can only move at the speed of light, and so at its fastest. And so would we be able to communicate or make contact with other advanced civilizations? And then my second part of the question is, if we would never be capable of that, but they may be advanced enough to be capable to come to us, well, given the fact they've survived long enough to be able to do that, do you not think that there would also be the survivorship bias where they would be so pro-natalist, given the fact that they've been able to survive this long, that there would be no hope of us to convince them? What do you think about those two things?
Distance is a big problem. Of course, if we received a signal from a civilization as distant as 2,000 light years, what we would see or get as information is 2,000 years old. In the meantime, the civilization might have disappeared.
Yeah.
If we were visited by a civilization, I think it would be a post-biotic civilization, because
Right.
if it is true that we cannot travel faster than light, any travel would take thousands of years, or at least dozens of years. And I, for one, cannot imagine how it would be possible for biological beings to survive space travels which take longer than a couple of years.
Mm.
Now, it might be possible that biological beings are so different from us that we simply have no clue. That is open to speculation.
Mm.
Now, you mentioned that question, if they have survived for such a long time, how could we possibly convince them of antinatalism? And I would like to add that question another question, namely, rather than answering your question, namely, if a civilization has an ethical progress behind her, she might very well have died out. So a measure for ethical progress might be the civilization's ebbing away, as I call it.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting because I know that some people have. I don't know who originally thought of this, but some people have linked antinatalism to the Fermi paradox, and saying that there may be an antinatalist answer to it, in that any civilization that would become advanced enough that we would be able to detect them also realized that it's unethical to procreate and so voluntarily went extinct. Now, obviously there's another question as to whether, that is the most likely of the answers to the Fermi paradox, but it's an interesting thing to think about, in that antinatalism has, at least in some people's thought, intersected with extraterrestrial the thoughts around extraterrestrial life.
Yeah. If I may,
Already.
let me
Yeah.
just shortly mention Schopenhauer here, because what he said is very interesting. He said there can't be an intelligence higher than we, more intelligent than we, because as it becomes more intelligent, it would have disappeared, because it would have reached insights which makes it disappear.
Yeah. So we're sort of in that sort of awkward middle ground of, we're smart enough to do the things we do, but we're dumb enough to continue doing them. Yeah, no, it's an interesting one with antinatalism and extraterrestrials. Did you have any more thoughts on antinatalism and extraterrestrials, or did you want to move on from there?
Let me just add that thanks to people like you, antinatalism is spreading to an extent, to a considerable extent. So we are
Yeah.
making headway.
No, thank you so much. And the thing is I think you've actually done more. So I should be saying that to you, because you've written things like the handbook, and you've written so many other things.
There are two aspects. You can write books or articles with which you reach just a few dozens of people, and you can produce videos with which you reach thousands of people. So both aspects are important, probably.
No, 100%. And I actually did it's not released yet, but I actually recorded a conversation with a guy yesterday called Carol Wainwright, who does book reviews on his YouTube channel, and he's done some book reviews of antinatalist books. And I was talking to him about how antinatalist literature has made a great contribution to, spreading the idea. And his sort of efforts to do book reviews and contribute to a culture of people engaging more with antinatalist literature is only for the better. So yeah, I think antinatalist literature, including literature like yours, has made a great contribution to spreading the idea of antinatalism. But yeah, so we've hit about an hour and a half, so I didn't want to go too much further, but I've still got a range of questions I wanted to ask you. So obviously you can give your answer as to whether you'd like to or not off the recording, so you don't feel held to anything, but I'd love to have you on for a second conversation at some point if you'd be happy to ever, because I think there's loads more ground that I'd love to cover with you.
It's accepted.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll definitely do that because there's so many more things I want to cover with you and pick your brains on. So we'll do another conversation at some point. But yeah, I wanted to leave that there because I know this has been a jam-packed hour and a half already. So I just wanted to first of all ask you. Obviously, I will include any links in the description so people can access them right there and then. But where is the best place for people to keep up with your work? And are there any works of yours that you'd be particularly keen for people to have easy access to? So what would you like to plug?
Perhaps Antinatalism blog
Yeah.
.wordpress.com.
Yeah, I'll include that one. And obviously I'll include the handbook, and to be honest, just send me any links that you would want people to have access to and I'll include them all.
Okay, I'll do so.
Yeah, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Karim, for agreeing to do this. No, it's been really interesting talking to you, and we've covered so many interesting topics, and I look forward to our second conversation whenever that happens. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your contribution to the antinatalist community and antinatalist thought, because I think it's been
being such an excellent host.
No, thank you, because I think your contribution has been very valuable. And so I think the more that we can put voices like yours, out into the open so more people can hear and read them, the better. So thank you so much for coming on.